Maybe.
Okay.
That might be a good idea.
I'm Robin Wells. I am a student at Methodist Theological School in Ohio, and I am seeking ordination in the United Methodist Church in the California Nevada Conference.
My name is Terry Williams, and I'm a student at the Methodist Theological School in Ohio also. I am seeking ordination in the United Church of Christ.
So we're here today to talk about issues of sexuality, especially as how they pertain to church and even how they pertain to the classroom discussion in Methodist Theological School. So I wanted to start out by reading from the Book of Discipline what our social principles say about human sexuality. We recognize that sexuality is God's good gift to all persons. We believe persons may be fully human only when that gift is acknowledged and affirmed by themselves, the church, and society. We call all persons to the disciplined, responsible fulfillment of themselves, others, and society in the stewardship of this gift. We also recognize our limited understanding of this complex gift and encourage the medical, theological, and social science disciplines to combine in a determined effort to understand human sexuality more completely. We call the church to take the leadership role in bringing together these disciplines to address this most complex issue. Further, within the context of our understanding of this gift of God, we recognize that God challenges us to find responsible, committed, and loving forms of expression. That's just the first paragraph of several paragraphs regarding human sexuality in our social discipline.
I think it's very interesting for me, having gone to a Methodist institution for undergraduate work, Ohio Wesleyan University, and now being at a graduate institution run by the United Methodist Church. It's very interesting to me how active the UN Church is in terms of discerning sexual mores, sexual identity, I guess you would say, in society. It's very clear from that portion of the social principles that United Methodists believe that we as people need to be working to understand sexuality, and that the church needs to be providing leadership in that role, which I think is quite a progressive stance for churches in modern era. There are a lot of other churches in our country in particular, and others throughout the world, who I think would be very hesitant to even venture into the waters of discussing sexuality, which is rather humorous, and as, of course, the discipline states, it is something that must be acknowledged for a full communion with God. What do you think about knowing that the discipline is a book that is revised every 4 years by a committee of 1,000 or so? What do you feel about that perception that the church should take a leading role in helping society discover and refine their understanding of sexuality? As you have speak for the United Methodist Church.
Well, you know that I cannot speak for the United Methodist Church. I have only been a seminarian at a United Methodist school seeking ordination. However, I do think it's important for the church to talk about sexuality, and as much as it's in our discipline, we don't do that in church, it seems to me. It's wonderful, I think, that I'm living at this time in history where I actually have the opportunity as a woman to be ordained in any church, any Christian church. But I also have the realization that no matter what room I walk into, no matter any place I go in the United States, I'm viewed first as a woman, and then secondarily as a person. That's really how it feels to me. We have a society that's patriarchal in nature because we talk about our founding fathers and we rever them. We should. However, in our conversations about ethnicity, sexuality, our differences, we don't seem to see the commonalities that we have, and we don't acknowledge our differences as being unique gifts. And although our Book of Discipline says that we affirm sexuality, obviously there's a line that we've drawn further on saying that we don't affirm the practice of homosexuality. And I think that really does a detriment to people who have differing sexual identities. It's hurtful to exclude people from church based on who they are. That's my opinion. And I know I'm not speaking for the United Methodist Church when I say that.
I think it's interesting the delineation that you draw there, that excluding people because of who they are is a problem. Because I think that the big debate in not only the United Methodist Church, but many other churches, the Anglicans, especially the World Communion, recently has gotten into this discussion about whether homosexuality is a choice or a practice or an identity. I want to go back to something that you just said in beginning your last statement. You made the statement that you as a woman have the opportunity to be ordained in any Christian church. I think it's interesting because there's an obvious outlier there. The qualifier that was missing was mainline Protestant.
That's true.
Generic, because there are, not just the Roman Catholic Church, but there are, many churches, Church of God in Christ, many offshoot Presbyterian denominations, some Missouri Synod, Lutherans, who would not necessarily support women's ordination, even today.
Well, in all honesty, being a United Methodist all my life, I did not realize that ordination was open to women. Pretty much since I was born, I think, 1974 is when I was born. So,
and I find that very interesting because the idea of a woman being woman is something that in the modern era we really don't have a major problem grasping. The idea that a woman does not practice at womanhood. A woman is a woman. There is an identity there that is grasped. And that women in a lot of churches are excluded from ministry and excluded from the church because of who they are. And I think that's very disturbing, especially for a lot of us in mainline denominations. The problem, though, comes when we don't extend that to all of the other elements of identity.
So, for example, you wouldn't say that I, as a woman, am living the female lifestyle.
Right. And for me, as an out gay Christian, that kind of language becomes very hurtful. To hear somebody say that I am living a homosexual lifestyle, it really belies a level of ignorance about who I am as a person and what my identity is. And it's not necessarily a malicious endeavor, but it really is something that belies a lot of ignorance.
Well, and it's also implied in that statement, the homosexual lifestyle, that there may be an element of promiscuity there, and that there are sexual relations taking place that are outside of marriage. And so that would not be condoned.
Well, I always find it very interesting when people use lifestyle language. They always mean sex. How it happens, who it happens with, what happens afterwards. They don't mean anything else but sex. I mean, lifestyle in that little, conundrum of a word really condenses itself down to sex. Homosexual lifestyle doesn't mean lifestyle, it means homosexual sex. The problem that people have is not with the lifestyle that I as a gay man lead. I mean, they don't have a problem with the fact that, I like law and order, and I eat M&Ms in, the order, the color that they come in, and that I really, prefer to keep a clean kitchen. That's not what they mean. They mean they have a problem with what parts I have and where I put those parts on other people if we may one day eventually have sex. I mean, it's really a drawn-out caricature to get around a fundamental bias against who people are. For me, being homosexual has very little to do with sex and a lot more to do with law. Which ironically is what Christianity is supposed to be about. Law. But we can't seem to get past that in a lot of venues. It's very frustrating to have to constantly explain to people that my lifestyle is not all about sex any more than anyone else's lifestyle is all about sex. But constantly, because of the society in which we live and the preconceived notions that are in this society, I have to defend against myself, not only in society, but in the church, about my identity and why that's not directly tied to sex and promiscuity.
But you don't really have to defend yourself if you're in an institution where the policy, whether written or understood, is don't ask, don't tell. Which you can have a gay person in your church, but we just don't talk about that. Right. And the idea that goes along with that is hate the sin and love the sinner. Mm-hmm. Which, go ahead.
Well, that ideology, that idea that you don't have to defend yourself, really means that we're just not going to talk about the differences that we have, and we're going to allow our perception to overpower your witness as a person. Our doctrine overpowers your being. Our doctrine and the way that we do things overpowers God's opinion in your creation. That, for me, is a lot more damning than actually having the discussion. And this is why I feel so blessed to be here at an institution, a Methodist institution, where we are able to have this dialogue in a controlled, functional manner. Albeit, it's not a perfect road. It's not the perfect setup. Ideally, we would love to be able to have more of an institutional dialogue. But when that's not possible, we as people, as individuals here, who are being prepared for ministry, are able to have those discussions and really get to the heart of an issue that the rest of the church is pretending doesn't exist. I think it's very interesting, coming from the United Church of Christ, we are in communion with three other Reformed churches through the Reformed Formula of Agreement. The Lutheran Church, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Presbyterian Church, Peace of USA, and the Reformed Church in America, the RCA. All of these other denominations, for the most part, have gotten to the don't ask, don't tell policy portion. And in the past few years, the Presbyterians have moved to a position where gays and lesbians are accepted as members in churches, but may or may not be accepted as candidates for ministry. And they leave it up to the Presbyterians. The Lutherans have now essentially done the same thing. They've gone a little farther, a little stronger language in the recent synod this year. But they have still allowed a level of ambiguity in their ordination procedures. And it's frustrating because looking at these different churches, you understand that while gay and lesbian people may be accepted in certain places in the church, there are other places in which they are excluded. And really what that ends up saying to queer people is that this church only wants you insofar as much as it can get use out of you. And it doesn't need you for these other things. We become an economic entity at that point. For me, that's the most frustrating thing in being a queer Christian, because I constantly have to defend my queerness in church and defend my Christianity amongst the rest of my queer friends. There's a large stigma in a fairly large part of the queer community that church is worthless because church does not want us. Church doesn't want us because church only wants certain people. And by extension, Jesus only wants certain people. Because like it or not, we as the church do speak for Jesus. That is a power that has been vested in the church. Like it or not, we have that power. And when we speak, people don't just hear us. They hear the representation of the whole faith, of all 2,000 years, right there in what we do, in the witness that we bear to them. So when we explain to people that you can come and you can join our church, but don't expect to bring your partner or your children in here. Don't expect us to acknowledge you on Mother's Day twice in your family. Don't expect us to allow you to feel out your gifts for ministry in the call process. You're only allowed membership. It creates a dual standard. There becomes a dual standard of heterosexual and non-heterosexual membership. And the people that suffer in this aren't just traditional queers, gays and lesbians. We have bisexuals and transgendered people especially who suffer terribly under this idea that identity is different than choice in regards to sexuality. It's very frustrating, particularly from a congregational perspective.
Well, and for me as a United Methodist, I've been going through some discernment on how I can be a straight ally, because in my personal theology, deep down, I know that God loves everybody and that everybody should be welcome, at least at the church that I serve. That's my ideal. And it's very difficult for me to reconcile the fact that I am a member, and I've been essentially a lifelong member of a church that has denied this for even, let's say that queer people, transgender, let's say they're a small portion of the population. But still, why is it that my church does this? Why do they think that they have the right to deny people God? We, as United Methodists, claim to have an open table, and yet this is what we do. And so it's very difficult for me, but I do understand from my personal experience and the way that I was brought up that I need to speak out differently. Being a straight person and speaking for people of different sexual identity does not make me homosexual, does not make me transgender, but I need to be secure in my sexuality. I know that I like men, but however, in the United Methodist Church, this provision going through ordination, where it's celibacy and singleness and fidelity in marriage, I'm neither one. I don't fit the category because I'm divorced. So it's not like the church fathers, as they say, being virginal and, not defiled and that sort of thing. I've been married. So where does that leave me? I've already been defined by my church. I can tell my Board of Ordained ministry that, this has been my experience. In my opinion, I think it's kind of silly for the expectation to retain celibacy in singleness when, really, what's the harm? is my point of view. But that would not be acceptable, I'm sure.
And for me, this is a frustrating part also, that most churches would affirm that sex outside of marriage is something that is wrong, that is immoral, that should not be condoned. Certainly not within ordained clergy or clergy candidates. However, individuals seeking ordination as gay and lesbian members in pretty much every state, aside from 3, don't have the option of being married. And yet sexuality is God's good gift to all people. And that we're only whole people when that gift is recognized and affirmed. That creates a lot of problems. Now, I understand your frustration with the Methodist system, because there is There is a kind of rigid overrule of the discipline on all the churches. But I'll share with you my frustration of the congregational system. I am in the United Church of Christ. We are the Church of the Pilgrims and 3 other denominations that got together in the 50s. On a church-by-church basis, these decisions are made. So for me, I don't even have the assurity of the discipline in terms of going into a denomination. I am essentially going into a denomination with 5,000 different places. 5,000 different churches, 5,000 different opinions. And I'm going to serve at least one of them, probably a lot more in my tenure. Finding safe space is very difficult in that kind of a system. It's not a perfect system. Now, of course, we kind of pick on the Methodists a lot when we say that we acknowledge that we do not have ultimate unity of doctrine. Because a lot of our churches do a lot of different things a lot of different ways. And I feel that in many ways we are able to bear a more authentic witness to everybody in the church by not having a uniform doctrinal entity that kind of rules our belief and practice. However, it is quite frustrating when you begin to go from church to church or place to place.
But I wanted to pick up where you were talking about safe space. And it's my idea that churches in general are a place of sanctuary. And being in a seminary, an educational institution for clergy, I think it's very important to have safe space where people can talk about issues of sexuality, not just homosexuality, but heterosexuality. What does it mean to be a woman in society? What does it mean to be a man in society? And to have the understanding that when you go out into the world, the majority perception is that everyone is heterosexual. Do you want to address that?
For me, I think it's interesting to see how we approach these things pedagogically in the church and in institutions of higher learning, theological education in particular. Particularly with feminist issues, we bring forward discussions, of what it means to be a woman in a way in coursework that tends to be, on the whole, fairly focused. We come together as a group. We have, some kind of a reading or a set entity, an objective, common experience that we take on. Hopefully take on. I mean, all of our professors would hope we did the reading before we come to class. But we come into the class prepared for a discussion in which we're informed of what things are to come. And we go about it with a fair amount of academic rigor, and we try to be as objective as possible. What's frustrating is realizing that as much as we may try, we don't necessarily hit that mark every single time. We get into these discussions, these haphazard discussions, about sexuality, about gender, about race, where we're not necessarily approaching it from a systematic viewpoint. We are approaching it kind of avant-garde, offhand, doing whatever we like. And it ends up really damaging lots of people in that room. It's like something.
I do. I have Cornel West here, and he has one of his essays that is entitled Christian Love and Heterosexism. So heterosexism may not be a word that too many people are familiar with, but to put that idea together that the dominant culture is heterosexual and that is also sexism that is just laced and permeated throughout our society. The question is put toward Cornel West as, we've often heard you speak about the connections among homophobia, patriarchy, and racism. Why do you talk about these issues? And how do you see them linked? And would you also talk about some of the personal challenges you face as a heterosexual black man in taking such a vocal stance against heterosexism? And he says, my own understanding of what it means to be a democrat, small d, meaning a democratic society. Partly what it means to be a Christian too, but especially what it means to be a democrat, is that you're wrestling with particular forms of evil. It seems to me that to talk about the history of heterosexism and the history of homophobia is to talk about ways in which various institutions and persons have promoted unjustified suffering and unmerited pain. Hence, the questions become, how do we understand heterosexism? Why is it so deeply seated within our various cultures and civilizations? We could talk primarily about America, but we can talk globally as well. I think it fundamentally has to do with the tendency human beings have to associate persons who are different with degradation, to associate those who have been cast as marginal with subordination and devaluation.
I think it's very interesting that he brings the point unmerited pain. And I feel a little bit of kind of morose irony at that, because I feel that there are a lot of individuals like Dr. West who can look at situations and say, yes, that's unmerited pain. But certainly the people that inflicted that pain, I don't think feel the same way in certain cases. Of course, there are lots of instances where people kind of venture into grounds where they're not intending to cause harm, but they still do. But I know for me, many, many times people have intended to cause pain through upholding heterosexual norms. We talked earlier about lifestyle language and why that's such a huge issue. A lot of people, they think, oh, lifestyle, the queers are just being picky. I mean, they're just whining because they don't like how we use our words. And, for me, that's very frustrating, because for me, there's a lot of unmerited pain that comes with that word. Lifestyle language, for me, is the language that stripped away my church background that I had as a child. It stripped away my friends and my family. It put me in a place in which I have been ostracized by probably 90% of the people I've ever known on the earth. And it has placed me in a situation more than once in which my personal safety was not assured. Lifestyle language beat me with bats and bricks and left me in South Columbus, half naked and bleeding in the ditch. And I don't think people understand when they use that word, the level of unmerited pain that they dig up for people, and they prick into people, and they pull out of people not knowing what they've gone through. Because you assume that their story is just like yours. You assume that they don't have to worry when they walk on a certain end of town or in a certain place, if they hold hands with the person that they love, or if they take their children out in public with their spouse. You don't automatically assume that they're anything different than you. But you have to understand what Dr. West is saying here. That level of unmerited pain is still there for those people. And it's always going to be there for those people. I find it very frustrating to try to communicate that to a society of individuals who still have no idea how new heterosexism as a concept is. We only recognize heterosexism because we recognize levels of homophobia that are in our society. People don't understand how new it is for me to be recognized as a person, and for my affection for another person of the same sex to be recognized. I did a little experiment with a few of my friends. You were actually one of them.
Really?
And in asking 2 questions, I wanted to know from a large group of my friends, what exactly do you think was the first country and the first date of the very first homosexual union? A civil union. And then I asked the same question, country and date, of the first homosexual marriage. Homosexual union and a homosexual marriage.
I don't remember you asking me this.
I did.
Okay.
You got very close.
Oh, good.
On one of them. Well, if you don't remember, let's ask you now.
I don't know.
What is the date? What do you think the date is of the very first homosexual civil union?
I don't know. I think that it has to go very far back. I don't even remember what I would have said. And in a different country.
Just throw in a date. Country and date. I want to know the country and the date of the first homosexual civil union.
Civil union.
Mm-hmm.
Civil union being different than marriage.
Yes.
Okay,
Civil union being defined as that point in time in which the state recognizes the legal union of 2 same-sex partners without recognition of the church being a necessity.
I'm thinking that that's before Christ stuff. That's, Greco-Roman sort of stuff there. It's just a guess.
Okay, I'm talking like now,
modern,
like
okay.
Modern times,
Okay.
modern recorded post-enlightenment time.
Civil union. Civil union, I would have to say California. Marriage, I would say, would be another country. I don't know. I'm just not educated. I don't know.
It's very interesting when people find out that the first homosexual union as a civil union happened in Denmark in 1989. That's 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The first homosexual marriage, that is the recognition of 2 people of the same sex loving each other from the state and the church, happened in 2001. I have had the right to love another person of the same sex, to love a person that I was made to love, and get married in the world for 8 years. I don't think people understand that. We talk about these issues like they're big, nebulous, undefined concepts. We talk about them like, they're issues that have been settled for us, and they've been settled for, some parts of our community. But they're not issues that are anywhere near being settled. They're issues that I, as a gay Christian, have to constantly advocate for every day of my life. Because I know if I don't, and enough of us don't, it's not going to last. And it's not going to stay.
Well, and you also have people who say that by having homosexual marriage, that somehow devalues heterosexual marriage.
Maybe because I love another person, that affects how you love your husband or wife. If it does, I would suggest the problem is less with me and more with you. Because if your relationship is based on me not being able to love somebody, that's an interesting dynamic that I don't think is necessarily intended in marriage. In short, I think that's going to require a lot of counseling time and maybe some prescription drugs. Just saying. Queers don't have the strength to, force the government to allow us to be married. But somehow we're able to destroy every marriage that has gone out into the world. It's very, very confusing to me, that power dynamic. It's very frustrating to know that there are people who sincerely believe that my right to love another person is not as important as their right to pretend I don't exist. That's frustrating. it's very similar to dynamics within race and gender that we have already faced in this country. You know, when women fought for suffrage, the argument was, but your husband has a vote. Implying that you and your husband would always have the same will. Of course, the implication being your husband's will would always be yours. I think it's very interesting what our language belies about our frequency.
Well, and there's also a favoritism in our society for heterosexual marriage, because in general, heterosexual marriage could produce offspring, and we continue the human race through heterosexual marriage. However, that's not always the reason for marriage.
Right. Well, and the concern is marriage about economics, or is marriage about affection? Or is marriage about something else?
Should you not be married if you do not intend to have children? Is there an age threshold? Since I am no longer able to have children, should I not be allowed to get married? I don't think that there's a restriction on that. However, we put a restriction on people who do love each other but happen to be of the same sex. And it also reflects the bias that we have in churches, and that you will find many congregations who say that they are a family church, which means they only really want families in a church. And maybe it's not stated forthright, but it's implicit there. And that if you are a person who goes to church on your own, that somehow there's something wrong with you. If you are a woman who goes to church, but maybe you have a family at home, that there's something wrong there. And maybe there is something wrong there. But how can we affirm people in their singleness, in their homosexuality, and their transgender, intersexuality, without compromising our programming to families in church? I think it can be done. I think you can serve all.
I think there's a perception that saints come with families and sinners come along. Because from the gay perspective, it is much easier to go into a church as a single gay person than it is to come into the church as two gay people and children. Which a lot of people say, gay people have children? Yes. Yes, we do. We have lots of children. I don't have any children, hopefully. But many individuals within the community have children, either through previous marriages before they came out, or because they chose to have children with their significant other and had to do that in very interesting and strategic ways. The state, our state in particular, does not allow two same-sex partners to adopt a child. And if one person in the partnership is an official parent, a biological parent, the other partner is not allowed to adopt that child. So the legality of it is the children still belong to one's house, not both. That creates a lot of problems. Legally, there are lots of things that one partner can't do and the other partner can, simply because the child bears the genetics of one partner over another. They still call them both daddy or mommy, but one is more equal than the other.
And to me, it seems that those situations where there are children involved, it makes it so much more important for churches to affirm those family situations. That maybe the state does not recognize that you are all a family, but we as a church family will affirm that you do all indeed live together and you care for each other and you love each other. I think that's very important for churches to discern, to think about, to reach out to people in that way.
And the frustrating part that all of this really comes back to is what is the church's role in affirming people where they are and in being a prophetic voice against sinfulness. That's where this question ultimately comes back to. The church has not yet decided that homosexuality is something that is not sinless. They are not able yet to affirm homosexual persons as something other than dressed up sinners, which is the frustrating part in interacting with people on a daily basis, knowing that I am always going to be judged based upon this one very small part of it, because other people can't get over the fact that God still loves me as God made me. It is very frustrating, in particular, when the church demands things of people that they can't possibly produce. You demand of a person who has been made by God to love other people of the same sex, you demand of them marriage before sexual intercourse when they don't have that option. It's very reminiscent in Matthew 23 and 24, where Jesus is talking about the scribes and the Pharisees who sit in Moses' seat. And they bind burdens heavy to be borne upon the backs of others, but they don't do anything to lift it. We demand this high morality out of all people, but we don't design the morality for all people. We design the morality for our people, and we leave everybody else out of the outside. For me, it's frustrating because people who belie that idea that, well, gay people, lesbian, transgender people, they really just choose to be that way. They don't understand the level of sacrifice that goes into the choice that is made. I will agree completely that a choice is made. A choice is made to be the person that God made you to be authentic. And a lot of people get into rabid discussions about, differences between gender and race and sexuality. Well, folks who are gendered a certain way or have a race in a certain way, if you can even say that, they cannot choose to be a different gender or race. We can choose, as gay people, ostensibly, to operate within the majority. So the argument is often placed out that, well, you choose to be ridiculed, and you choose to be viewed by society in this way, and you choose to have these burdens placed upon you. The problem for me is, as a gay person, I understand that the only choice that I make is whether or not to call God a liar and deny who I am for the comfort of others. For me, even if I operate in the majority, even if I would go out and seek out some poor woman who would have to live with me as a husband and bear children and pretend to be heterosexual, that would be practicing heterosexuality. I would still be gay. I would still be queer. But I would be practicing heterosexuality. That's not who I am. And I may be operating within the guise of the majority, but that doesn't make me part of the majority. That makes me a liar. Which is what's frustrating. Because in some respects, individuals who have a gender or a race that is undesirable in their particular society, they endure a lot of hardship. But they do not have the opportunity and they do not have the responsibility of declaring their authenticity. They don't have the opportunity to call God a liar. They don't have Peter's temptation to deny the Christ that lived and died and rose again in their being. They don't have that privilege and that burden to have to carry out an authentic witness voluntarily. I think for me, what's most damning in the church is to realize how many people, beyond those of us who are advocating and loud and obnoxious about this issue, how many people the church has silenced because the church has power and because the church speaks for God. It's really frightening.
It is. But I want to think in my idealism that the church has the power to love above all things. I love you, Terry. I love you very much. And I love you for who you are. And I think we should say that more often in church.
It's frustrating to know that when people say, we love you as you are, many times what they're really saying is that I love what part of you I know. It's hard for gay people to know that once you really know, once you know all about me, you may not love me just as I am. You may not have that unconditional. But I think that's the story that queer people have to tell to the world, is that we as Christians have got to start loving people right where they are. Not where we want them to get to, not where we want them to go. Where they are right now. There is no concept of loving the sinner and hating the sin. There's only a child of God in there. And love has to encompass the child and the label and the sin. It has to envelop it all. Just like Christ envelops us in love and grace and mercy. And without that, there is no gospel. Without that, there is no truth. For me, that's really important.
Thank you for speaking the truth today.